Hello. Doing this guy sort of last minute, so gonna be a rough edit, and I have just made myself a martini, so it's gonna be that sort of wrap up. I'm here to do my February wrap up. February was sort of a weird reading month for me again, but I did read a lot more than in January, so let's just take our wins where we can get them, I guess. And yeah, I read a little bit of nonfiction, which I was very much needing in my life, and I read a lot of middle grade fantasy in like a sort of fugue state, one might say. So it's gonna be a mix, but let's just get to the books. The first book that I read in February was Disfigured by Amanda Luddick. This is sort of a collection of essays by Amanda about how disability and disfigurement is portrayed in fairy tales, both in ye olden times, like the Grimm fairy tales, as well as modern Disney reinterpretations and stuff like that. So it's actually a really interesting book. I came into this book sort of thinking that this was going to be a really thorough, maybe somewhat academic literary analysis of fairy tales and disability representation in fairy tales, but it ended up being very readable. She intersperses her own experience as a disabled woman throughout, so it's sort of like actually more of an interwoven memoir and cultural criticism book, I guess. So yeah, I enjoyed this even more than I expected to, which my expectations were pretty high. So that was really wonderful, and I recommend this to everybody who's like interested in this topic at all. Even if you're not interested, I think it would be a good read. Yeah, so I gave this one a 5 out of 5. If you want to hear me ramble on a lot more about it, you can go look at my February reading vlog. We're being speedy. Again, I don't want to edit too much. I have to put this up in like no time. After that, I read The Great Pretender by Susan Kahalen. This was sort of a surprise love it read for me. Basically, this book is about the psychological study that took place in the 70s, where a group of psychological researchers tried to get themselves committed into mental institutions just by saying like, oh, I hear these auditory hallucinations, like empty thud, stuff like that. And then once they got committed, they were supposed to act completely normally. It was a study to show that we actually don't have very good diagnostics for psychiatric disorders, and sanity and insanity, when put in the right context, are sort of indiscernible. The book is basically a lot of background about psychiatry in general. It goes through like sort of the history of psychiatry as it developed through to the modern day, and it went into depth into this research study. I'm not going to give any spoilers in this wrap up here, but things get a little wild. They go places you might not expect them to in a straight up like informative nonfiction read, I guess. So again, I did talk about this a lot in my February reading vlog, and I think I have settled on giving it a 5. The author does a really good job of sort of like outlining the limitations of psychiatry, but also the ways in which it can help if you're like in need of psychiatric help. And it just does like a very good job of shading in those gray issues. In the introduction, she talks about wanting to sort of, sorry, I'm just holding this like happy hour with Bunny. I don't know who Bunny is. Some waspy wife from Connecticut who's drinking her cocktails with a Percocet from the 1950s. Okay. Anyways, so yes, so she does a really good job of sort of describing those sociological underpinnings of how we think about psychiatry. In the introduction, she talks about wanting to sort of dissect why we treat psychiatry and like psychological problems so differently from other parts of our physical health, given the fact that the brain is a physical part of our body, which is something that I had been like really thinking about since I read her last book. She wrote Brain on Fire, which I read for nonfiction in November, and originally got me thinking about a lot of these issues. So I don't know if she like entirely like resolved that. Maybe it's not like a resolvable question or something like that. But I think she did like a good job in like at least asking the right questions, you know? And it is a book that made me want to read more on this topic again. So I really want to read Now, something about like modern psychiatric care. There was a lot about what psychiatric care in the 70s looked like. I would really like to know how that's changed. I think The Collected Schizophrenias is sort of one place to start with that, and I did really enjoy that book, but I would like sort of like a more thorough deep dive into that, and also like the intersection of psychiatric care and the prison industrial complex, because, you know, it was just like sort of a off-the-cuff point that she made at the end of the book, but she did mention that like most psychiatric care nowadays is actually performed in prisons, which is sort of wild if you think about it. So yeah, I found this book really interesting. I think I gave it a 5. If not, I'm gonna go back and give it a 5 because it was very good, and it just like hit a lot of topics. So I was like, oh, but what about? Anyways, I highly recommend it. I think she's also very good in writing in a very narrative style. The whole thing is sort of written as like a mystery. She goes through and sort of like in her investigations, they're sort of like structured almost like a mystery novel. So if you're sort of not a huge nonfiction fan or like scared of the genre a little bit, this might be a good place to start. So after that, I went on a bit of a Jonathan Stroud bender. I'm not apologizing. It is what it is. Jonathan Stroud is an author that I really liked from, I think I read him in like middle school or high school. He wrote the Bartimaeus trilogy. I'm a little embarrassed by the rest of my reading month, if we're being honest, so just pull off the Band-Aid. Next up, I read The Screaming Staircase by Jonathan Stroud. This is his newer series. Basically, this is a series of middle grade horror novels, I guess. The premise is that it's set in an alternative London where basically over the last 40 or 50 years, there's been the problem, which is ghosts have started popping up all over the place. And nobody really knows why the problem started. In this London, it's very dangerous to be out after night. These ghosts are malicious. If they touch you, you die. You know, they like have lots of like scary ghost things that they do. But the only people who can actually see them are children. So in this society, the adults basically go home and like lock themselves up at night, and the children go out and like deal with the ghosts. The children are sort of like organized into what they call like psychic detection agencies. So they go out and like find particularly bad ghosts and like deal with them by like finding the source of the problem. Basically they're Ghostbusters, which is sort of a wild setup, but it's a lot of fun, you know. In the first novel, you meet Lucy, who's the main protagonist. She's a part of Lockwood and Company, which is the only psychic detection agency that is run by children, basically. The other ones, they have like adult supervisors, but the kids do all the work, but they're sort of like autonomous. The first book is mainly just sort of like getting to know this world, and they basically sort of solve this mystery where they find a murdered girl stuffed in a wall. When you talk about it, all of these plots are actually pretty gnarly, but it's written in like a middle grade friendly way, so it's like not actually scary when you're reading it, I guess. Anyways, so they're like solving mysteries, doing stuff. I gave the first book 4 out of 5. Then I read The Amulet of Samurkind, which is another Jonathan Stroud. This is a reread. This is the Jonathan Stroud trilogy that I grew up with and that I love a lot, and I was like, oh, let me just reread this one. So basically, the premise of this one, this is another alternate modern day London where there are magicians and there are jinn, basically. There are like magical beings that the magicians summon up. So basically in the first book, you're following Nathaniel, who is a young boy being trained as a magician, and he sort of uncovers... I think this book is sort of hard because a lot of the plot actually happens quite late in the book, so I don't actually want to spoil anything. But Nathaniel summons up a demon or genie called Bartimaeus. So basically it's sort of like about their relationship, and then also like uncovering some shady shit in the British government. This has been a terrible summary, but this was like one of my favorite books as a kid. So I highly recommend it if you like young adult, middle grade fantasy. I think it's like an overlooked book in general. So yeah, this is just like one of those comfort reads that I came to because I was a little stressed. And yes, I gave it a 5 stars. The end. Okay, moving on. Next up, I read the second book in the Lockwood & Co. series. There's gonna be a theme to this month, don't you worry. So that one's called The Whispering Skull. I rated this 3 stars. In this book, you get a little bit more into the characters, into the world, I guess. I feel like I can't actually talk about this without ruining last book, so I'm not going to. This series is structured as like a mystery series, so every book they're solving new cases, but then also the like larger plot is progressing in general. This one I found interesting. It wasn't as good as the first one. I rated it 3 stars. Then I read the third book in the series, The Hollow Boy. I rated this 2 stars, but I think I should actually rate it 1 star. I'm just embarrassed that I rated a book 1 star and then continued to read the series. This was a very bad book. The third book is not a good book. Again, we're sort of like progressing through the story. We're still hanging out with Lockwood & Co. What I hated about this book is that basically the central thing in the book is that the main character, Lucy, has a big crush on Lockwood, who's like the kid who runs the agency, you know? And Lockwood decides to hire a secretary who's also a girl, and literally the whole book is Lucy being jealous of the secretary. And I really like unlikable characters. Like, that is one of the reasons that I really like Jonathan Stroud as an author. I think he does not shy away from like making his protagonists have like huge character flaws, you know? That is something that I really value in him as a young adult author, because I think that not enough young adult authors do that. So the fact that she's jealous isn't really the problem for me. You know, like people get jealous. I feel like it's like maybe one of the less desirable, unlikable characteristics a protagonist can have. But there's just like no contextualization, reflection, stepping outside of the first person to like make it work. There are mechanisms by which an author can like make it obvious to the reader what's going on, or like the author can sort of nudge the reader and be like, this is like not great, right? I see you, you see me, we're together, this protagonist is doing this weird thing. That's just what she's doing, but like, we get it. Okay, cool. But there's like none of that. It's just sort of like the whole book is just Lucy being like, I hate this girl, but I'm not gonna like say that. I'm just gonna think it a lot or something. Anyways, so just because that's like the central tension in this book, it really didn't do it for me. It didn't go anywhere. But the final battle with the ghost was very cool, so, you know, who knows? And then I did continue on with the series, so what does that say about me? Then I read book number 4, which is called The Creeping Shadow, and I did really like this book because it got a lot more into, like, actually how the world works. Basically, my summary of the series as a whole is that it could have been a trilogy. Like, book 2 and 3 could have easily been, like, mushed into book 1 and 4, and it would have been a lot better. Like, the whole series would have been so much better if they'd just done that. He didn't do that, so whatever. Fine. I'm not a writer. Anyways, again, I think I'm just not really going to try to describe the plot here. I really like that we're getting more into the world and like into the background of what's happening in the world. So I rated this one 4 stars. And then the last book in the series I read was The Empty Grave. So again, it's sort of like more central plot driven, where it's like resolving the main thing that's going on. And I liked it. I didn't like it as much as the 4th book, so I rated it 3 stars. So that's 6 Jonathan Stroud books in 1 month. You might ask, was that enough? No, apparently not. Again, fugue state. This was like all audio, and it was just the background to me playing a bunch of video games when I was off of work. I just need a my brain to be off, need a story, and like, you know. Anyways, the last book that I read in February was The Golem's Eye, which is the second book in the Bartimaeus trilogy. Basically, again, I actually can't talk about this because I don't want to ruin any of the plot from the first book, but it's still following the same sort of main two characters, which is Nathaniel and this genie Bartimaeus. I feel like I'm like much less descriptive of this series than the Lockwood & Co. series, but if you're gonna choose one, definitely go with the Bartimaeus trilogy, because I love this trilogy. Yeah, that's it. Again, I just don't really know if this is like one of those things where I'm like very nostalgic about it because I read it in high school and I like had a strong emotional reaction to it at that time. Very possible, but it's also just a good book. So I read 7 books by Jonathan Stroud this month. I read 2 nonfiction. Where does that leave me? Who fucking knows? Okay. So this has been Last Minute Emma. I'm gonna go eat my dinner, which just came out of the oven, so nice. Thanks for bearing with me today and also with my weird upload schedule. I'm trying to get back on a normal schedule a little bit because I feel like just for myself it would be nice, but there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So thank you so much for coming to my channel, and hopefully I'll talk to you next week. Okay, bye!